My name is Chris Woods. I'm the superintendent here, and I just want to first of all say thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time to come and learn some more about our upcoming levy. Appreciate that very, very much. I want to tell you before we start, we're recording this one. It's facing this way at me. It doesn't show any of you. We want to put this online so people who have not been able to attend one of our 5 forums, we want to put this online for people to see so they can see exactly what you guys are going to get to see and hear tonight. At the end, if you have questions and you ask those, I'll probably repeat those because I've got a microphone on so that we can get those recorded, but it won't have your faces on there and they won't even probably be able to hear you. And that's why I'll be repeating them. But I just wanted you to know that so that you weren't surprised when you saw this presentation online and maybe you did hear your voice in the background. But it's recording up here on my tie. But thanks for being here. We have one of our board members here, Denise Hendrickson, a longtime board member, and our board members have been at every one of our 5 presentations. And so I want to apologize that you hear the same thing over and over again. And we've got some other folks that have heard this before. Also, we have some staff here. Thank you, staff, for being here. I appreciate each of you for taking the time. And our citizens group, you saw them when you came in. We're going to hear from them later. And then Terry Malone, our Director of Communications. I'm going to talk a little bit more about her later because she's been instrumental in helping us communicate a lot of information. And so we're going to get started. 3 goals tonight. Number 1, share some factual information about the levy. Number 2, we are just really working on responding to some of the things we've heard from the community, and that means trying to build some trust. And then number 3, doing that through being transparent about the levy. And we're going to share some of the things and themes that we have heard, maybe on social media or from other folks. And so we're going to share with those and just be real open about it. So first of all, I want to start by sharing that this is not a new tax. This is a replacement levy. The current levy that was approved 4 years ago ends at the end of December 2024. So our current levy runs until then. If this levy gets passed, it would start January 1st, 2025. So again, not a new levy, but a replacement that would start at the end of this one, so it wouldn't be on top of the current one. As far as how our levy dollars are spent, we're going to get into a little more detail throughout the presentation, but here's kind of a picture of how our levy dollars get spent. About half of it is in the teaching and learning department. And then about 18% arts and electives, 13% health and safety, then 11% in operations and technology, 11% in athletics and activities. About 85% of our overall budget, everything we spend, about 85% of that is people, is our staffing. And then about 15% is all non-employee related costs. So supplies, curriculum, operations, things that we need for that. So a big portion of our budget is spent on people, and that's the same with our levy dollars. And we're going to see that as we move forward. So this is what our revenue looks like. Almost 80% of our revenue comes from state funding. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we move into this. And then about 13% to 15% roughly is our levy. And that covers a big piece of the pie for our revenue in our district. The other thing that is important to know, the second bullet up here, This isn't something that most people know, and you wouldn't necessarily unless you are highly involved in public education funding. We get what's called local effort assistance. If you pass a levy at a certain threshold, you get additional funds from the state. And so in our case, it would be an additional $2 million on top of the levy if we were to pass that levy. If you don't pass it, obviously you don't get that local assistance. That's not something that is widely known. It's just an interesting part of the funding mechanism in our state. Now, for us, and I'll talk about this more as we go forward, people are going to ask, are levy dollars necessary? And we're going to let you make that decision based on how you see specifically how they're spent. Public education would argue that our funding system is broken in the state of Washington. And if you can see that currently roughly 80% of our funding comes from the state and the rest is coming elsewhere, either federal or grants, but a big piece of that levy, that's the only mechanism we have to bridge that gap between what the state funds us at and where we are currently funded. And again, I'm going to let you make that decision as to whether or not you think the dollars we are spending are valuable enough to continue supporting a levy. This is more specific about how we are spending those levy dollars. I'm not going to talk about each line item, but I do want to call out a couple of them for you. First of all, extracurricular athletics, activities, and field trips, about $1.7 million. We don't get any funding from the state for athletics and activities and clubs. Each district is responsible for that funding on their own. Typically, that falls in the area of levy dollars. And so all of the things that we do around athletics, activities, and clubs, that is funded through our levy. And don't worry about the baby at all, please. It doesn't bother me whatsoever. And so our funding for that is covered out of our levy, in addition to pay-to-play fees, which are the lowest in the county. We have not raised those and kept them low by design because we want to make sure that we are covering those costs as much as possible. And then fundraising that maybe athletic teams or clubs do that would also add to that. But the bulk of athletics and activities and field trips come out of levy dollars. The other one I've been talking about are the social, emotional, and behavior supports. I think many of us educators would argue that we're in unprecedented times. The behaviors that we are seeing in our classrooms have been magnified. And since the pandemic, we are seeing more challenging behaviors than we've ever seen before and more significant needs as it relates to social, emotional, and mental health. Anxiety is at an all-time high, depression, suicidal ideation. We believe that the pandemic had a lot to do with that. I also believe that these have a lot to do with that for many of our students. But going into the pandemic, this was certainly a concern, but coming out of the pandemic, a greater concern than I've ever seen in my 26 years in education. Going into the pandemic, a lot of uncertainty, but as we got into it, state and federal government realized that school is going to look very different. So they provided what were called ESSER dollars, additional funding for school districts to help offset the costs related to school looking very different, and adding staff to help with some of those needs that we were starting to see as kids were coming back. Many districts, including Yelm, hired a lot of people in this area, in the social, emotional, and behavior supports, counselors, mental health specialists, outreach specialists, social workers, restorative coordinators. We now have staff like that in every one of our buildings in the district. And I think staff would tell you that they don't know what we would do without them now. They have become an integral part of what we do each and every day. Before the pandemic and years ago, I think we would say that the majority of our students came to school ready to learn. I think now we would say many of our students need support before they even get to that place where they feel like they're ready to learn. They might need a check-in when they get to school. They might need a place to go. They might need somebody to talk to. And it could be something around the social, emotional, mental health. It could be around physical needs. However, those needs look for students, they're there. And we are seeing them, whether it is in the classroom, on the playground, between classes, on the bus. It is everywhere. And so we have used those ESSER dollars that way. So going into this year, we had about $4 million that we were using from ESSER funds to help pay for those staff. And then this year, there's about $400,000 left of those ESSER dollars that we continue to use. So the majority of those staff were funded out of levy this year and general fund. We did make some cuts last year, about $1 million to reduce that spending. However, we kept some of those staff because we knew that there was a need. So moving forward, that's a decision that districts are making. We're not unique in this. Majority of the districts used ESSER funds for staffing and for additional support. And so even districts across the region that passed levies are still in a cutting situation because of those ESSER dollars going away. So again, this is how we spend our levy dollars in our district. It looks pretty similar from district to district. And like I said earlier, the majority of this is people. So what does our current ask look like with the levy? The first ask was at $2.50, which is the maximum you can ask for. And then from there, you can also calculate how much growth can happen over the life of that levy. The cap there is 8% growth. So $2.50 per $1,000 of assessed value is the maximum the school district can ask for, up to 8% growth over the life of that levy. So from year to year. So the first time we ran it, it didn't pass, and our board had a difficult decision to make. Number one, do we run it again? I think there was no question. We can't do what we're doing without levy dollars. Number two, do we run it at the same amount? And our board really listened to community members and many community members saying, you know what, we're tired of paying taxes and we're tired of taxes continuing to go up. And I don't think there's any disagreement there. I think we all agree on that. I think that we are all tired of paying taxes. The unfortunate thing is that this is the only mechanism we have to bridge the gap between how the state funds us and where we believe schools need to be funded. And so the school board said, we're going to lower what our ask is at $225, and we're going to lower the percentage of growth to 4%. So the maximum amount it can grow each year is 4%. So that's where we are. And this is also the maximum amount that can be collected each year. As you see, 2025, 26, 27, 28. And then over here, that's what that would look like if we were able to collect the maximum amount, $2.25. The other piece is the bond. About 4 years ago, we had a bond pass that was for building. And one of the things I share with people, an easy way to remember, bonds are for building, levies are for learning. So those bonds went towards things like upgrade of fields and athletics facilities, safety improvements in all of our buildings, some facility upgrades. So that bond, we pay all the way out until about 2038, I believe. And so currently we're paying $1.17 per thousand of assessed value. So if we were to pass, this is what going back to 2023, this is what we're currently paying. So this is in relation to our neighbors. People ask, where do we relate to other districts in our county? Bethel School District is here. Olympia is here at 392. Bethel's at 443. Tumwater, 390. North Thurston, 379. We are at 319. Tenino's at 307. Rainier at 291. Kind of a broad look going back to 2010. This is how Yum Community Schools have looked. Red is the bond, so different bonds over the years. And then gray would be the levy. So currently, right now, 2024, we're paying that $1.17 for the bond, and we're currently paying $2.15, even though the levy was approved at $2.50 the last time it ran. So the last time the board ran it at the maximum amount, $2.50, 8% growth, but we're currently paying $2.16. So you're going, okay, so we passed it at $2.50. Why are we paying $2.16 or $2.15? A lot of factors go into what we actually end up paying, even though the cap would be that maximum amount. A lot of factors, one of those factors meaning how many people do we have living in our community? So how many different people are paying that tax, including businesses? So that amount is spread over the entire community, the entire county of Yum Community Schools. And then also we share, because part of our district is in Pierce County, so we have some voters there as well. So you can see in 2023, we were paying $2.02, even though $2.50 amount was approved. 22, we were paying $2.30, and then back in 21, paying the full amount of $2.50. So even though we're asking for $2.25 moving forward, ultimately that gets determined by how many people are paying the tax, and typically it's somewhere underneath that $2.25 threshold. But the maximum would be, going back to this, the maximum amount would be $2.25 per thousand of assessed value. Again, that does increase as your assessed value increases, but it's still only $2.25 with a maximum of 4% growth each year. And then the other maximum is here. We can't exceed this amount. So Terry's done a fantastic job of listening to our community. We've talked to many other districts. We share ideas, we share thoughts about how can we provide this information? How can we share it in a way that makes sense, a variety of ways? And this one is just a diagram that if our home had a value of $500,000 and actual was $215, and this would be the yearly amount. If it grew 4%, $225, the increase would be there. So it kind of shows an example of how your taxes might increase with a 4% growth. The other thing that Terry has created, and I think we're going to pull it up, the tax calculator. This is on our website. We're going to talk more about where you can find all of this information. Terry put in a tax calculator, and it was pointed out last night that maybe in the tax calculator we should put, this is the maximum that you would pay. So you could go in and plug in the value, and it'll calculate the maximum amount that you would pay. And so this is there for people if they wanted to go in and figure out what their taxes would be. We'll talk more about where you can find this as we move forward, because at the end we're going to show you exactly where this information sits. All right. So I talked briefly about some other themes that have come up. And social media. I don't know if you've spent any time on social media, but a lot gets said. Some is factual, some is opinion, some is just kind of crazy. And So if you spend time there, you've seen everything across the board. I don't spend a lot of time there personally. However, I have staff that do, and thankfully, they've been able to help us pull out some themes on social media. And in an effort to continue to try to build trust and transparency, we've pulled out those themes and we've said, you know what, let's address them and let's talk about them. And so we're going to do that. And so one of the top things that has come out is administrative salaries. Some conversation around what the previous superintendent, Brian Wharton, was making. We're going to talk about that and what I make. I'm going to show you that as well. We're going to talk about transportation funding. Some people have said, why would I support a levy if we can't even fill bus routes with drivers? So I'm going to dispel some myths about funding and transportation, election costs, some conversation around who bears the cost of an election. And then there's some questions out there about what are we teaching our kids? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And again, in an effort to just be transparent and open about these things and show that we're not trying to be secretive about any of them. We want to show people where this information sits and give people the power to access this so that they can make decisions on their own. So I want to start with what was out there about our previous superintendent, Brian Wharton, making $309,000, I believe, what was said. And so Brian retired at the end of last year. Brian was on step 7. So here's superintendent salaries, goes up to step 7, and this was the maximum. So this is where Brian was. So why did it say that Brian was making $309,000? At the end, when somebody retires, they've had accrued sick leave and vacation days, and various organizations and state agencies give you an option to cash those out when you leave. And that's exactly what Brian did. So when Brian left his last year, he made $309,000 because he cashed out his days. And he's done. But he was actually right here on the salary schedule at $233,376. I talked to Brian earlier this week and I just said, hey, even though you're gone, we're still talking about you. And I shared with him because he doesn't spend much time on social media, but I shared with him. And this is all public knowledge. This has been out in articles. I think just the other day they published top state salaries. I think it was in the Squally Valley News. I think it was in Olympian, Tacoma News Tribune, and some other large papers. And so for me, I currently am on step 4. I came to the district with 4 years of assistant superintendent experience. And so in the contract, it allows the school board to give you experience. And so that's where I am. And then I can earn up to 15 additional days if I work those additional days. I can tell you that really I'm never off during the winter. I'm one of 3 people. Jason back there is one of the 3 who drive the roads at 3:30 a.m. to make sure that we can put buses on those and make sure that our teen drivers are safe. On weekends, if there's something that happens in our buildings, you know who gets calls. It's me and our director of facilities. But we choose these jobs. We choose them because we want to be here. And so I do work those additional 15 days. This information is all on our website. What's unique about Yelm, and I've shared this a number of times, I've been in a couple different districts, Olympia and Tumwater. In Yelm, they actually have our administrative salaries in policy. And that's unique. And so every year, our board has to adopt policy 5310. This is where all of our principals, high school, down to assistant principals, program coordinators, same thing, from first year of experience all the way over to the 7th year of experience. So our administrators don't get to bargain their salaries. That's something that is done to us, and those decisions are made by the school board. And each year, they adopt this policy. There are some other ways that administrators can enhance their pay through having a master's degree or doctorate degree, the professional development or additional days that I shared with you, a cell phone stipend because we expect our administrators to be available by cell phone. And so each year, these positions are adopted by the board. And typically what happens is they're increased by IPD. So, which doesn't quite amount to inflation, but usually amounts to about 3.4 to 3.9% is the increase that our administrators and directors get each year. Somewhere between 3.4 and 3.9, depending upon what IPD lands at. That's usually the mark that our board uses. That's the increase that our administrators get. The other thing that our board tries to take into consideration is what are people around us making, and are we competitive? And so another thing I wanted to share is that we heard that either previous superintendent Brian or me are the highest paid superintendent in the area. And so I wanted to share what we know today. North Thurston current superintendent makes $315,678. However, they've just hired a new one because she's retiring at the end of the year, and that position was advertised at $330,000. Olympia Superintendent Patrick Murphy makes $257,537. And then Tumwater Kevin Bogatin, brand new superintendent, makes $241,726. And so then Yelm comes after them. And so one of the things that I want to make sure is that I'm always being transparent about that. And also knowing that that's a lot of money and that's a lot of responsibility, and I take that very seriously. And so I want to make sure that this is not a secret for people and that we are not trying to hide this. Also, OSPI publishes this information. And so we're going to show you again where that link is so that if you wanted to visit that, you could see it. In addition to, like I said, the newspapers typically publish this every year, this information, and it usually relates to the previous year. So it's behind by 1 year when it gets published. Let's talk about transportation, which has been a big topic for us. And it's been a big challenge, not just in Yelm, but in all districts. First, I want to talk about the challenge that we had, and then I'm going to talk about funding. This year, we've experienced a shortage of drivers. That's not unique to Yelm. It's across the state and across the country. Since the pandemic, we have experienced an extreme shortage of drivers. A number of reasons for that, not related to money. Our transportation is not funded through the levy. And I've heard things like, why would I fund and vote for a levy if we can't even get drivers for buses? Levy dollars do not go towards transportation. The only time levy dollars go to transportation is when we're transporting our teams, athletics, activities, field trips, that would come out of levy dollars. But our day-to-day transportation does not. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. But why the shortage in Yelm? The shortage in Yelm, I believe, was attributed to a work environment that was not very positive. And we were seeing people leaving and going to other districts because it was not an environment where people felt like they were valued, welcomed, and felt like it was a positive place to be, quite honestly. And we made a change in leadership this fall, and we've got a new director of transportation and a new assistant director of transportation, Jason Roberts, who's here tonight, and I appreciate him being here. And then we also have our director of HR and facilities. This has been a team effort across the board. And I can tell you today that we've made significant improvements. Yes, we had 6 route cancellations today, but the 2 weeks before spring break, we celebrated a full week without any cancellations. And we were really excited about that. We've been able to hire, I believe it's about 8 drivers, and some of them are on the road with their own routes. And each one of them comes to us with a different level of experience, so they have to go through training. The great thing about our training and our relationship with our neighboring districts, as Olympia School District, North Thurston School District, have jumped in to help us with training, help us get our drivers ready to take their own routes. We're continuing to hire. In addition to full-time drivers, we're also going to hire subs so that when our full-time drivers are out, our subs can fill in. So we are working hard. People are coming back because they are hearing about positive things that are happening in our transportation department. Our transportation staff and leadership, they are phenomenal. They are great people. They have been through a lot this year, especially on social media. They've taken a beating, and it's not their fault. Quite honestly, it is not their fault. They've been doing everything they can to patchwork things until we could get drivers. Jason has even been on the road driving a bus. And so I'm very proud of our transportation department and what they've done. And we are getting very close to being fully staffed with all of our routes. And our goal is to even add some routes because we've got some full buses. I ride the bus every month. I ride a different route each month. And so I get to see firsthand what our drivers are doing. I get to see firsthand what our assistants on the buses are helping with. And I get to see our students, elementary, middle, and high school. And so I get to do that each month. And I learn a lot about our transportation, and they're doing a fantastic job. As far as funding goes, so we are reimbursed for our ridership. What that means is the number of students we transport in the morning and afternoon, we get state funding for that. So we are fully funded by the state for transportation. That is not the case in every district. But in Yelm, we are fully funded by the state for our transportation. We do not have to subsidize that with our levy. The only time we are paying out of our levy for transportation again is for teams, for activities, for field trips. That comes out of our levy to pay for that. And assistance. If we put assistance on the buses, that can come out of the levy as well. Otherwise, we are fully funded by the state. The next thing, you've probably heard about us later this year purchasing a couple new buses and then a couple new ones the following year. How that gets funded is through our state depreciation program. So we get funding based on the depreciation of our fleet. That goes into an account that can only be spent on new buses. Can't be spent on personnel, can't be spent on vans. It can only be spent on new buses. So as you get that money through depreciation, it goes into an account. And then when you have enough, you can purchase new buses to make sure you're always keeping your fleet up and that you don't have buses broken down and you don't have enough to actually transport students. So that's how we're funded. That's how we purchase new buses. Again, our transportation day-to-day does not come out of the levy. Election costs, that's another thing we've heard about. The fear that these election costs are passed on to our voters. They are not. The school district is responsible for paying for the election. Typically what happens, like in November, when there's multiple districts on a ballot with ballot measures, we get to share that cost. We share that cost with all the districts that have ballot measures. The only cost that we are specifically responsible for that on our own is any mailer that we send out. And we are required to send out one mailer to the community, to all the families that live in Yelm Community Schools. That's a requirement with the election, is sending out one factual mailer with information. We bear that entire cost, and then we share the rest of the election costs with any other district that is running a ballot measure, a bond, a levy, a capital levy, a technology levy, anything like that. Now in 2019, when Yelm Community Schools failed the bond the first time, they had to run it again. When they ran it again, they were the only ballot measure on the ballot. Therefore, they had to pay the entire cost, and that was $76,400. So that is the election cost and the cost of the mailer. For us, this election is going to cost us about $95,000. To run this election. We're the only ballot measure on there, so we are the only ones contributing to the cost of that. And then the publications, we have more people in Yelm than there were in 2019. People are moving here at a pretty alarming rate, just because we get to see the applications for permitting for the houses and the other dwellings that are being built. And so we try to mitigate these costs as much as we can by doing our own copying in-house when we're able. And then a lot of that is postage, having to send that out district-wide. So that is election costs, and that's how those are covered. So what are we teaching our kids? This has also been something that's been out there. And so I want to talk a little bit about how that is decided. So first of all, back in 2020, Senate Bill 5395 required that schools provide comprehensive sexual health education. So right here, again, we're going to show you where to access all this information, and so it's going to be available to you. But this is the law as it relates to sexual health education. Then OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, then comes out with a little more detail about the law and about how or the vehicles that you will use to help teach those standards. And then from there, each district creates their own learning standards and instructional materials to meet the letter of the law. And that's where our school board comes into play. And I believe our school board has done a fantastic job of taking what the state requires, recommends, or is asking districts to consider, and then determines what are the needs here in Yelm. Specifically, what are the needs with our students, and then making the best decision for Yelm Community Schools. The decision that's best for Seattle Public Schools may not be the decision that's best for Yelm Community Schools. So, on our website, we have a place where we list all of our curriculum and our standards. This page right here is our standards, and then down below, when you click on this one right here, comprehensive sexual health education. What we've done, and this has been up here, but we're going to put this, actually it already is on our Levy page, frequently asked questions. Here on this side is before Senate Bill 5395, what we were teaching. And then over here is the changes, if any, that were made once the legislation was passed. So we make sure that that's available to our families. So we're putting it out there up front so families can make decisions of their own if they believe there's something that, you know what, we believe that's something parents should be discussing at home, and that's not the school's responsibility. I think our board has done a really good job of making decisions about what do we believe our educators should be addressing in class, and what do we believe should be left for home and our parents to decide how that's discussed, how that is taught. And I think our board has done a really nice job of making those decisions and still meeting the letter of the law as it relates to what the state tells us we have to do. So speaking of that, we just had a short session in our state. And Senate Bill 5462 has been in a lot of headlines. This was a bill that was passed, and their expectation is that by October of 2025, every district will have a plan of how that gets implemented. So what will happen next is obviously there's the Washington state law as relates to 5462. OSPI will then come out with their recommendations and guidelines for reaching that law, and then our district will create learning standards. So that hasn't been done yet as far as down to the granular level of what does that look like and how is that taught in our classes. But I have confidence that our board will address this in the same way they have other sensitive and social issues of what's best for Yelm Community Schools and our students and families while we still meet the letter of the law. So the other thing to keep in mind, again, in education is there are some things that come to us as law. The state says you will do this. The federal government says you will do this. And then there are things that come to us as recommendations. And then that's where we have to decide what is best for us. One of the things we are seeing in our state is a real tug of war between local control and state control. And board members are voted on locally. And in the past, most decisions were made at the local level by those elected officials, board members. What we're seeing now is some more decisions being made by the state saying school districts will do this, school districts will do that. I believe there's going to be some conflict, and there already is, around local control versus state control. And there are many districts across the state that are saying, wait a minute, we vote on elected officials to be school board members in our district, and that's where these decisions should be made. Because what's best for Tenino might not be the same as Spokane. And all of our districts are very different around the state. Our communities are very different. And so there's going to be a lot more conversation across our state around this idea of local control versus state control. And you could take out the content area and insert any type of content. The bigger issue is, should it be state or local decision as it relates to that? But I can tell you that our district will continue to follow the law, but at the same time do it in such a way that's sensitive to the unique needs of our community and our students. And we will take that very seriously. So what are we teaching our students? We're going to make sure that we're doing those things, but most importantly, that we are partnering with our families to be sensitive to their needs and what it is that they value and what they believe should be done in the classroom and what shouldn't be done in the classroom and maybe should be done at home. So I've been talking a lot. This last slide is a QR code that takes you directly to our levy information. And what I'd like to do is, if we could go to that site that Terry has been working tirelessly on this site to take all of what I just shared with you and put it in one spot. We want to make it easier for you to access all of this information. And so this is the page where all of that information sits. Down here, we've got frequently asked questions. And Terry just added 4 more based on our forums that we've had. And those ones say new next to them. And I've talked about those today. But these are all the questions that either we've anticipated, they've either come to us from community members, we've seen themes on social media, people have emailed us, they've called us, we've heard from previous levies and ballot measures. And so what we're trying to do is, as any new information or questions come our way, we're putting them here. So then you can click on any one of those, pull down, and there's factual information for you to read and then make decisions of your own based on that information. And so we'll continue to put that information here for people to see. I think one thing that I've been sharing in our meetings, and I shared with our team after the first levy didn't pass, I said, number one, I think this is a blessing for our district. I think it really is. I shared that, what if we would have passed the first levy at 51% to 49%? We probably would have said, awesome, let's move on. Let's start planning for next year. Let's go. What we wouldn't have done is probably spent time finding out why 49% of our voters said no. We would have probably just moved on and been satisfied with that, like any other school district and any other levy. What we've been forced to do instead is say, you know what? 62% of our voters said no. We need to find out why they said no or why they didn't vote. And so we've been out having conversations. I said, this is a real opportunity for us to get better. This is a real opportunity for us to build trust and be transparent and listen to people in the community and find out why people voted no or why they didn't vote at all. And we've got to be willing to hear that. We've got to be willing to take responsibility for that. And we've got to be willing to do whatever is needed to improve. And so that's what we're trying to do. Willing to hear the difficult things and not get defensive, but be open to how we might be able to change. So I think this is a good thing for Yelm Community Schools, even though as a first-year superintendent, it's not something that was on my entry plan of going through a levy twice, but I think it is a good thing for us. I think it's going to force us to dig deep to where we need to improve. And so I'm thankful for that. One other thing that has come up, and I'll go back, if you want to go back to the slideshow. Yes. So one of the other pieces of information that has been out there is about special education funding. So in education, we get funding in different buckets. And with those buckets come different rules of how those dollars can be spent. In special education, we get funding from the state and federal government to serve our students with special needs, IEPs, 504s. We get funded 15% of our enrollment. That's how much special education funding we get. If you serve more than 15% of your students in special education, that's on you to cover the difference. Right now, we subsidize about $2.5 million out of levy and general fund to cover the additional special education costs because we have more than 15% of our students receiving specially designed instruction, either have an IEP or a 504. Legislation was just passed in this session, bumped that up to 16%. So we will get a little bit more, but we will still be subsidizing out of levy if it passes or general education funding. So what I share with people is that's required by law to provide specially designed instruction for IEPs, for 504s. That doesn't go away if the levy doesn't pass. That just means we got to pay for it some other way. And so that just means the $2.5 million that we're currently using to subsidize special education, we got to find that somewhere else or make cuts somewhere else in order to pay for that. Because special education is required by law. That is not something that goes away even if we're subsidizing it through our levy. That is protected. So that's something that has come up also through conversations. With that, I want to stop and ask staff, first of all, if I've missed anything, if I didn't cover anything, if I misrepresented anything. Staff, please correct me on that. And board.
One topic that I've seen coming up is people are talking about like the OSPI report card in our schools and that our schools are not performing well. And so how do you respond to that? I know how I respond to that, but a superintendent has to respond.
Just to add on to that, it's more along the lines of alternative school versus our school too, but it's more along the lines that we have the lowest in the state, or the highest in the state dropouts in all our alternative schools.
Yeah. Several factors in my opinion in being here since July and my research leading up to it. We serve a challenging clientele. However, that's not an excuse for not doing well because we've seen some tremendous increases just in test scores that just came out, especially if you look at Mill Pond, McKenna, some other pockets in our district. And so I think that one of the things, we have pockets in our district where we do very well. And it's not because those kids are better. It's not because our staff is better. It's because we're doing some really strong instruction and some great intervention. So in my opinion, we need to replicate that in other buildings. The other thing that contributes to what I think overall scores, discipline and attendance. We have tremendous challenges with attendance in our district, primarily at secondary level. We are having attendance issues in part because there isn't any accountability there. There used to be strong teeth in county law where we could take somebody to what's called Becca court, which means that's a law that requires you to attend school. Then there were some, if a school had exhausted all of their strategies to try to help that student get to school regularly and on time, then the county would step in and help intervene and hold student and family accountable. Those aren't nearly as strict as they once were. And so we don't have nearly the amount of support as we once did to hold students and families accountable for attendance. So we work with families, we bring them in, we bring students in, we try to find ways and or things that are a trigger or a hook to bring them in. I shared in another presentation that for me, my hook in high school was athletics. And I've shared with people that I graduated high school with a 2.5 GPA. And there was question as to whether or not I would even graduate if you ask my mom. But it was athletics that kept me in school. It was athletics that I went to school because I knew I couldn't participate if I wasn't there. Doesn't mean I did a lot while I was there, hence the 2.5. But for us, we need to find the hook for our kids. And so I think our discipline, our attendance, our pockets of excellence that need to be scaled up across our district. All of those things contribute. We have some tremendous staff in our district and we have some great things going on. And I think we need to be able to replicate that in addition to continuing to provide that social, emotional, and mental health support. I think that has become the number one priority in public education, not just in Yelm, but across our state and across our country. Everybody is wrestling with how do we support these behaviors that we are seeing in our tinies at preschool, all the way up to our high school students. One of the things that I've done is reached out to our chief of police and our sheriff and our mayor to say, could we assemble and have a community forum on personal safety targeted towards our youth? And so they are all on board. I said, can we wait till the levy's over and then schedule this? They are all on board because we're all concerned. We're concerned about drug use. We're concerned about access to weapons. We're concerned about just really dangerous behavior. And so I said, can we come together and bring families and parents and talk about how do we improve? How do we make this better? And so back to the question, it's going to take our whole community to improve in the classroom. It's not up to our teachers alone. It's not up to our administrators or our coaches at the district office that are helping in academic areas. It's not up to our transportation department alone. We have to do it collectively. And I've already seen where we can do it. And so I would argue that we have the best people to do that work in our community. And that's coming from years in Tumwater School District, years in the Olympia School District. We have amazing people here. And so I have no doubt we can do it. In addition to that, I will add, we are seeing an increase in attendance at our alternative school. And we are seeing some positive results there. Students who feel like I can't be in a hallway And between classes with 1,700 students, it's overwhelming. I get anxiety. It doesn't work for me. And so that smaller setting for them, our enrollment in our extension school has increased tremendously, but we're also seeing success there. And so we need to find new and creative ways to meet the needs of students who don't fit the mold of the typical public education model, particularly at high school. And so we need to help there as well. And I think that'll help prevent students from dropping out. And then also continuing to promote those CTE experiences where students get opportunities to get certification so that when they graduate high school, they can go into industry, and that 2-year and 4-year college is not the only option, that there are many other pathways to be successful. And so we have to continue pushing that as well. And those things can be hooks for kids to keep them in school and help them to be successful. Very long-winded answer, but there's a lot that goes in my mind when I start talking about how do we help students to be successful.
And isn't the OSPI report card kind of old data as well? And
Yes.
so when you look at that, it's a snapshot. So a lot of, when you're looking at the growth of students or how many kids are passing, it's based on the SBA scores, which have not been great, admittedly, because we are recovering from a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's one picture of our kids. And if you could come into our classrooms and see what's happening at the classroom level and see the other assessments that are happening, and you could look through some different lenses and not just this one lens, it's so amazing how our kids are rebounding. And it literally has taken them a couple of years to make that rebound happen. But they needed support in social, emotional, and they needed support in academic areas, but it's happening. And so, as somebody who's in the classroom, they are growing, and it's so exciting to watch them go from, looking at that screen and having to do online school to now, like, being there and growing every day. And
Yeah.
so just remember that that's like just a snapshot of time, and it's one test. It's not the whole picture of
And when some of
doing.
you're exactly right. And when some of your highest performing districts are getting in the 60th percentile in math, that should tell you something. And so it puts things in perspective across the state. So I think you've got to put the information in perspective. But the bottom line is we've got to improve. And we've got to find ways to take the pockets of excellence and expand them across our district. You had a question?
Is there any, again, space social media, is there any risk here that y'all's gonna lower the bars and we can get that up? Because that's, you see it everywhere else. That's really one of the biggest things I'm worried about.
Yeah.
Just lower the bars so we can get those numbers.
That's a great point. I'll be honest with you. I would much rather us maintain a high bar and help kids get there than lower the bar and misrepresent. I'm not afraid of us not being first and us having lower scores that are accurate and saying this is where we truly are. So let's now work on how do we move forward. I don't want to lower the bar for our students. And in fact, I think we can raise it. And I think there's a quote in my office that paraphrase that students will achieve what you believe they can do. And I think we have educators that believe our students can do it. We just have to figure out how do we provide those supports for them to get there. And so, no, we have no interest in lowering the bar just to show that we've got great numbers. No, absolutely not. I would much rather be honest and open about it. So then more people are willing to come and help us collectively say, okay, let's address this together. This isn't just a school issue. This is a community issue. And so I appreciate you asking that.
Piggyback off of something you said about the attendance. So with attendance, what about children that are out of school district that are using, for instance, Modesto Day, and aren't even using it, aren't even coming to school? Are we allowing those children to be re-admitted into the school, or are we trying to say, sorry, you're not even attending, we're using funds to try to get you here? Sorry, is that something we're doing? Because I have particular students that I know that have that issue and have had the DECA bill enforced, but it doesn't enforce.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, good
So-
question.
And then on top of that, where does the funds come from the DESCO bank bands that go out and pick up students out of district?
Are you referring to McKinney-Vento?
Yes, now, sorry.
Thank you. So I'll take those as two separate issues. One, transfer students. A lot of conversation lately because we have denied quite a few out of district transfers. It's that time of year where people are applying for transfers for next year. I've talked with all of our administrators, and we've denied more than we've accepted of out of district transfers, specifically because I believe it's our responsibility to make sure that we are serving the students and families that live in our service area in classes that are not overloaded. And so what we've told families is, yeah, it's a no right now. Come back in August and you can ask again when we know more. But we have a priority to our students and families and our teachers. And then the third piece of that is after our students and families, providing reasonable sized classes, our staff who are teaching them. The third piece is financially, we need to make sure that those classes are at or below our collective bargaining agreement levels, because otherwise we're paying overload, which we're paying a lot of overload this year. And so we need to fix that. So short answer to your question is we are denying many of those. We're even denying many of the in-district transfers from one school to the other, unless we can guarantee that that class is not going to be overloaded at the start of the school in the fall. And then your other piece, McKinney-Vento. McKinney-Vento, what that is students who are experiencing homelessness. If they're in our district, they're experiencing homelessness, we're required to provide transportation to and from school regardless of where home is that particular night. That is the law. If they are in temporary housing in Tacoma and they were our student, we are required to provide transportation for them until they get stable housing. And then at that point, if it's a different district, they can ride the bus. But we are required by law to provide transportation to and from school for any student that is ours when they are experiencing homelessness. And the idea behind that is obviously they're going through a lot of transition and a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. The one thing they do want to try to maintain is stability with school. And so we can recoup some of that funding for that transportation, but we're required to provide that. Jason, did I miss anything on that?
The only thing I'd add to that, sir, is we do split the cost of transportation with the district that they're residing in. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And then ideally what we want is number one, to help them find stable housing, which is again, another thing that we're helping them try to find and connect them to resources. And ideally you want them to go to the neighborhood school they live in. But until that stable housing happens, we'll continue to transport them to us.
What are the methods that are used to determine
Stable?
housing?
There's specific language around what stable housing is and what homelessness is. And if you were to look up the McKinney-Vento law, we have to follow the letter of the law. For example, living with another family is still considered homeless. And so even if you are doubled up or tripled up in a home, that's still considered homeless. And so there's specific language that spells out what a district is required to do and what defines homeless. Good questions. Yes.
Well, very exciting. There's a lot of things that come into this. And as a past teacher, and I just want everybody to know, especially the teachers, that I had 3 students go through the school. I'm a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, actually. And one of my kids, well, 2 of them actually weren't happy in school of other reasons. I happen to think that children are learners and love to learn. That's what they come to school to do. I'm very happy to hear that the bar won't be lowered. In fact, it will be held, because that is a confidence builder for anybody that's in school. And that's why we send our kids to school, to learn. You don't have to be their life at public school. They have a life, and I hope it's rich. But they go to public school to learn. And these days, there's so many other distractions besides learning that we're asking public school to provide. I'm not for that.
Yeah.
I'm not for that. I continue to believe that the real hook for any child is to find a teacher that spreads a wing out and sees the potential in that student and gets them through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge help. All of my children, of the 5 in their families, there was one teacher that saw the potential, and it was magnificent, really. And to my one student who I want to laud you, the one that just that you didn't make it in high school here, but one went to the extension and just, absent from class, didn't want to go to war every day. And that's something for a parent to feel too. I'm sending my kid to war every single day because it's not held. Our maturity and our humanity is not held.
Yeah.
So that the students can feel that. And this person is now on her way to a full nursing degree. Loves it, can't get enough of lab and everything else. So I believe that STEM exists in our mind and our brains, and not necessarily. I think it's a wonderful aspect to be a learner in life, and I think we can encourage that in our schools, and I hope we can do.
Thank you for sharing those stories. And one particular thing that stood out to me is the importance of relationships. And I think those of us in education know if every student in our schools has their person,
Yes.
if they have their person at school, it can be the custodian, it can be their teacher, it can be administrator, it can be a bus driver. If they have their person, they're going to be way more successful. It's when they don't feel like they have their person. And I talked about when I was hired, the first staff day with everybody, I talked about 2 people that were influential in my schooling because I was not a great student and I struggled for a number of reasons. But there are 2 people that I pinpoint for changing my life. And so that makes a lot of sense to us as educators. Then if we can provide that relationship and connect with kids, and it's hard to connect when they're not showing up, but if they're not showing up, we need to find out why. So I appreciate you sharing what you shared. Thank you.
And thank you for taking the bus. It's
Oh.
a lot more than gaining information about the transportation.
Yeah.
You get a real sense of where things are when you're on that bus.
It is funny when you ride the bus. So we start with the high schoolers. They want to come on with their headsets on, sit in their separate seats, the same seat every day, and just kind of have their hood on and just go about it. And I sit right next to them and start chatting with them. They do want to talk. They want relationship and conversation, but they don't know how to do it. And then the middle schoolers, you just ask them a question. I asked them, I said, when I was sitting with a group on the bus, I said, do you guys have a teacher that you know cares about you? And they were like, yeah. I said, well, how do you know? And they started answering me and saying, well, because they know about me, because they know me, because they care about me. Well, how do you know they care about you? Well, because they ask me questions, they talk to me. And then there's the littles, and the littles are just all in your business, and they just want to chat. They haven't lost that joy. They haven't lost that ability to communicate with each other. So somehow we've got to figure out how do we continue that with our littles onto our middles and onto our high school kids, because somehow they lose that, or I believe they get issued a cool card when they go to middle school, and they're card carrying members until they leave high school. And so we have to figure out, how do you get through that cool card that they get? But that's a whole nother conversation. What other questions do you have that I could try to answer, or our team could try to answer?
Have you already decided or like looked at what the cuts are?
Good question. No, we have not decided. So what would happen, right here you see how our current levy is being spent. So what would happen is we do have a more detailed list, even broken down more than this, that we presented at our last board meeting to our board of directors, to give them an idea of dollar amounts in particular areas that we could start with as a planning mechanism. But really what would happen is we would start drilling down deep, and ultimately our board would guide me on making those decisions. We would get input from them, we'd get input from staff, we'd try to get some input from the community. And so if we have to cut $15 million, it's going to touch everything. You can't cut $15 million in a district without touching every aspect of your district. But I'll also remind you, going back to the 85% is people. So when you've got to cut $15 million, you can roughly figure that 85% of that $15 million has to be people in some way. You could only cut so many paper clips and materials. You're going to get into cutting people. That's just, there's no way to avoid that. And so we would have to look long and hard as to what that looks like in our district and still be able to provide the necessary things for our students. So the short answer is no, that hasn't been decided, but that would be our work immediately after. Yeah.
Can I add to that? Just because, so I'm in the early learning field, but prenatal to 5. And a lot of the conversations that we're having at a systems level is about like the uptick in early intervention services.
Yeah.
So I find that concerning because like I see transitional kindergarten up there. And so when you're talking about like a need for alternative learning styles at higher level, like higher grades, I think that's because like at a younger age, those gaps get bigger and bigger and bigger as kids get older.
Yep.
And when we're coming out of COVID, you know, there's almost, we were just talking about this, a need to set like different developmental standards because of what's happening. And until that happens, I mean, you need services like that so that later on down the road, there's not as much of a need for alternative learning styles.
Yeah.
And so that, like, I just see that as concerning to be able to lose resources like that. Break my heart.
I appreciate you sharing that. Our developmental preschool is so important because now we've got these kids at an earlier age. We can give them services at a very young age before they're even in kindergarten, as opposed to finding out that they need services in kindergarten or first grade or second grade. We're now able to put those safeguards and those programs and services in place at preschool and even younger in some cases, so that we can get that jump start. So you're right. So then maybe at the back end, there's less need for services and diverse programs because we're addressing those earlier. And I think that's something that all districts are taking a look at, kind of that birth to 5 area, and how can we continue to work there. And I think our state's catching on. They're now funding full day kindergarten, and they're starting to fund preschool programs. And so I think we're going to get services younger and younger paid for by the state, as opposed to families having to pay that themselves.
Even home visiting, I mean, it's
Yeah.
voluntary home visiting services, which is what I specialize in.
Okay.
to focus on. We're seeing an uptick in funding for those too.
Yeah.
Because, it's about school readiness.
Yep.
They have readiness before they can get to school.
Yeah.
And to kind of piggyback on that, like that's one of the challenges. So I teach middle school, and that's one of the challenges that we had when we came back from COVID, is our kids missed out on 2 years of sitting on the carpet with their elementary teachers, reading stories and learning how to be friends and how to work together and how to have class meetings. We do that every day in elementary schools. And so they came to middle school and they're expected to behave as middle schoolers, but they didn't know how. And so we had to help them become middle schoolers and to adjust. And so when we talk about discipline issues on the rise, of course discipline issues are on the rise because they missed 2 years of sitting on the carpet at class meetings. Like that's a huge component of early learning that was missed out on. So that has gotten better. That's one of the other things that has gotten much, much better for our middle schoolers. But, that was a huge issue.
Yep. And that sitting on the carpet for the littles translates to being at school with your peers as high schoolers, as middle schoolers. And so there's a lot more conversation around that. But any other questions that you have? Yeah.
Got you.
I figured you would have some.
If the levy fails this time, when's the next soonest available time? I know it's next year, we do it 2 times a year, but is that going to be the district's goal if it does fail is to try to push for the levy again next year?
We would have to, the soonest we could do it is in a year. And that would be up to our board. I would assume that our board would want to seriously consider it, but that would be their decision. Because I think operating without it, we've seen Centralia have to do that. We've seen some other districts in the past do that. It's a significant challenge and it's hard to recover from.
Okay. And then the next one is, because there's a lot going on with this one, I've been hearing this one, I don't know why I haven't asked it yet. But with the McCleary Supreme Court decision, people think that's supposed to be 100% funded. Can you give some clarity on that decision and why you're asking for more? Because the state is supposed to, as what they said, and when people are thinking that it should be 100%.
Yeah. So it's a long answer. I'm going to try to cut it short. So the McCleary decision was a decision that the paramount duty of the state was to fully fund public education. So several years ago that came up and there was a lot of fighting for more funding in public education so that public education didn't have to rely on local levies to offset the costs. Well, the state did give additional funding at that point in time, and then they said, we're done. Well, the other thing they did at that time is they took off any parameters as it pertains to bargaining with staff. So there were rails, kind of, so to speak, a box that you had to stay in for bargaining, and there was a prototypical model used for funding educators, paraeducators, teachers, administrators. Well, they took that off. They said, we're going to give you more money. We're going to take off these parameters. There you go. Well, what happened is at that point, districts started feeling the pressure of meeting inflation demands. So depending upon where you live, different contracts were paying different amounts of money. So now you can imagine, okay, Yelm pays here, Olympia pays here. I can drive 20 minutes and make this versus this. So now that puts pressure on Yelm to pay more. So what's happened over time is more and more money has gone towards the costs of people. Healthcare has increased and premiums have increased. Utilities have increased, but the cost of people has gone up with inflation, but also with those parameters coming off of how you can bargain in a prototypical model. So the state said, here you go, more money, and we're taking away the rules, but we're going to fund you at that same prototypical model we did before, but you figure it out. So what happened was it was kind of a fend for yourself type, and everybody's now bargaining for more. And I don't think anybody's saying that people don't deserve it in public education. It's a tough job. And I don't think people are disagreeing with the fact that our educators deserve to be paid appropriately. But now you're competing with your neighboring districts. So you're always competing to the place where it's become the haves and the have-nots. And so a district that is smaller has a more difficult time trying to compete with a larger district that might be next door. So a handful of years ago, the state budget, about 50% of that budget was public education. Today, it's about 43%. So we've seen a steady decline in funding for public education since that initial push with the McCleary decision to fully fund public education. So the other thing that happens is you'll hear the state gave funding in special education. We went from 15% funding to 16%. That can only be used for special education. That doesn't help any other area of our system. It only helps special education, but as a whole, is it more money? Yeah, it is. But we still have to offset the difference between how we're funded in special education and how many students we actually serve. So yes, overall, are they giving additional funds in some areas? Yeah, in some areas. But if it's not general education dollars where we can discern how that's spent, it doesn't necessarily help.
So it's more of the fine print on that decision that a lot of people are just unaware of.
And it depends on who you ask. If you ask public educators and administrators across the state, I don't think you'll find one that will tell you public education is fully funded. And I think we would love to not have to rely on local levy dollars to provide the programs and services that we believe are basic education that our students should have access to and exposed to before they graduate from high school. And there's probably not a district in the state that would tell you, gosh, we would love to not have to run levy and ask our local voters to approve those, or bonds for that matter, to build schools. And so that's going to continue to be a fight. Short sessions are hard because there's not a lot of time, whereas long sessions are a little better for public education to go in and fight. And we have lobbyists that do that for us. That's their full-time job, fighting for public education. So we will continue to fight that because we believe it's the right fight. And if we can get to a place where we don't have to ask our voters to approve local levies to bridge that gap, that would be tremendous.
Local council.
Yes. Call your local legislators and senators and tell them they need that information. So thanks for that question. I will stick around if you have any other questions. But again, thank you for coming. I know it's a commitment after a long day. I appreciate your time. And we're going to put this on our webpage as well so other people can see it if they weren't able to join us. But thank you for being here and have a good night.